It was Saturday night. The sound of the party filled the neighborhood square. Laughter, loud music, everything seemed ordinary, until chaos exploded. Shouts cut through the silence, and within minutes, the atmosphere of joy turned to despair. In a vacant lot, a man was lying stabbed, lifeless. Next to the body, crouched, shaking, covered in blood and completely in shock, was Lucas, a young man of just 16 years old. It was Saturday night, one of those common neighborhood nights where the square becomes a meeting point. Music echoes through the streets, and families get together to forget, at least for a few hours, the weight of their routine. Children were running, couples were talking, and everything seemed absolutely normal, until the unexpected happened. Around 10 p.m., what was once party noise turned into desperate screams. It was the kind of scream that paralyzes anyone, of fear, of pain, of something that was completely out of control. In a vacant lot, a few meters from the square, the scene was frightening. A man lay on the floor, motionless, his body stained with blood. Next to him, crouched down in a complete state of shock, was Lucas Almeida, a boy of just 16 years old. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, his gaze was lost in space, as if he still couldn't understand what had just happened. He didn't say a word. I didn't cry. He didn't run away. I was just there, paralyzed. And if this story has already made you feel a lump in your throat, if at any point you have put yourself in the shoes of this father or son, then I invite you, from the bottom of my heart, to leave a like and subscribe here to the channel. Because stories like this need to be told, they need to be remembered, and your strength, your like, your subscription, makes more people see realities that the world prefers to ignore. When the police arrived, the scene seemed to already have a culprit ready. There was no escape, there was no resistance. Lucas was covered in blood, his clothes were stained, and his silence, at that moment, spoke louder than any explanation. The police approached him cautiously, but without delicacy. They ordered him to get on his knees, handcuffed his still shaking hands, and took him straight to the police car. Neighbors watched everything in shock. Some murmured, "It was him." Others shook their heads in disbelief at what they saw. A young man known in the neighborhood, quiet, reserved, now became the center of the worst kind of attention. At the police station, Lucas remained silent. He couldn't explain himself. I couldn't even put together a complete sentence. The trauma, the shock, the fear, everything mixed into a whirlwind that was impossible to organize. But what no one knew was that outside the police station, someone had already received the news. Someone who, upon finding out what was happening, didn't think twice. Roberto Almeida, Lucas's father, a hard-working mechanic known to everyone in the neighborhood, for his honesty, dropped everything and ran to try to save his son. When he arrived, he saw the disoriented boy surrounded by police officers, lost in a world of accusations that he didn't even understand. Roberto felt a tightness in his chest that no father should feel. And it was there, in front of that scene, that he made the decision that would forever change their fate. He took a deep breath, looked the agents in the eyes and said, his voice firm but choked with pain, "He didn't do anything. I was the one who was there. It was me." The room fell silent. The police officers looked at each other. They didn't expect that. Roberto repeated, this time with even more certainty, "It was me. He tried to stop it, but I was the one who took that man's life. It was me." And at that moment, the investigation changed focus completely. The 16-year-old boy, previously seen as the main suspect, became just a witness, and the father became the confessed perpetrator of a crime he had not even committed. But why? Why would an innocent man commit such a serious crime? The answer was simple and devastating. Love. The love of a father who, seeing his son destroyed, terrified and probably condemned for a thoughtless mistake, decided to carry the weight of a tragedy on his own shoulders, even if the price of that was his freedom, his life, his future. And that's how the Almeida family's biggest nightmare began. A nightmare that was not born of hatred or evil, but of the purest, and at the same time, most dangerous feeling that exists, the love of a father willing to sacrifice everything to save his son. But what Roberto didn't imagine was that that decision would forever mark their fate, because the truth, no matter how long it stays hidden, has a cruel way of always coming back to the surface. Roberto Almeida was 42 years old. He was a simple, hard-working man, known in the neighborhood not for his wealth or influence, but for his quiet manner, his honesty, and, above all, for the unconditional love he had for his family. Mechanic since he was young, clean record, never got involved in trouble. But that night, when he set foot inside the police station and saw his own son, Lucas, just 16 years old, completely destroyed, with his face pale, his eyes swollen from crying, and his clothes stained with blood, everything changed within him. He didn't think like a citizen. He didn't think like the accused. He thought like a father, as someone who would give his own life without hesitation if it meant protecting the one he loved most. The delegate barely had time to ask anything. Roberto looked at his son, felt that knot crossing his chest, and made the decision that would forever change the fate of that family. He took a deep breath and said the words that silenced the entire room. He didn't do anything. I was the one who killed him. We were together. He tried to stop it. It's my fault. Just like that. No lawyer, no proof, no legal guidance. Just a desperate man trying to free his own son from a future he knew would be devastating. It was at that moment that the direction of the investigation turned. The police immediately stopped their interrogation of Lucas. The boy was removed from the room and taken to another wing of the police station. Now, the target was Roberto. The police officer's gazes changed. The tone of the questions changed, because at that moment, the truth no longer mattered. The system had already found its culprit. From then on, everything happened frighteningly quickly and superficially. The police, who were supposed to seek the truth in every detail, seemed relieved to have a culprit on their hands. They didn't look deeply. They did not question the gaps. They didn't investigate what really should be investigated. The murder weapon. It was never found. No one bothered to search the land accurately. No one looked for traces. They didn't even do a complete sweep of the surroundings. The little they collected only served to support the narrative already constructed. There were no direct witnesses. People heard screams, they heard the fight, but no one saw who actually hit the victim. Even so, it didn't matter at that moment. The crime scene did not have security cameras, no visual record, no image that could in fact confirm or deny what had happened. All the investigation had was a scenario of quick, impulsive violence and a man who, out of love, was willing to carry a crime he didn't commit. The forensic expert in a hurry stated that the attack was direct, without planning, with signs of struggle and defense. Everything fit perfectly with what Roberto had said, and that was exactly what the prosecution wanted. The case was practical, clean, and resolved quickly. Roberto's testimony fit like a perfect piece in a hastily assembled puzzle. And so, without looking for anything else, without testing other versions, without comparing details, the prosecution closed the case. For the system, the truth did not need to be absolute. It just had to be convenient. And when the trial began, it was no longer about seeking the truth. It was about staging an outcome that for many there was already decided before the first witness even spoke. Roberto sat before the jury like a man condemned by his own act of love, even without material evidence. No murder weapon, no fingerprints, without any concrete trace linking him to the scene. Nothing. The only proof was his word. A confession extracted in the midst of despair at seeing his own son on the verge of collapse. The defense lawyer tried to argue that that confession could have been made under strong emotional pressure, that Roberto was not a cold criminal, but a father who acted with a wounded heart. He tried to explain that a father's love, when mixed with the fear of losing a child, can lead someone to carry unimaginable guilt. But the jury had already chosen what they wanted to see. For them, Roberto was just another man trying to alleviate guilt, trying to spare his son from a possible conviction. And so it was, based on words and not evidence, that the verdict fell like a slow death sentence. Roberto was sentenced to 22 years in prison for simple murder. In the room, the silence was absolute, but inside that man's heart, the noise was deafening. He knew the weight he was putting on his shoulders. I knew that sacrifice was definitive, and as I listened to his sentence, I only thought about one thing, that at least Lucas could have a life that he would never have again. Roberto was taken straight to a medium-security prison, behind bars, far from home, far from family, far from the life he knew, but still firm in the decision he made. From the first day in prison, he remained silent about the true authorship of the crime. He never, at any time, changed a single word of what he confessed to at the police station. In everyone's eyes, he was just another convict trying to serve his sentence, but inside, he knew he carried much more than a sentence. He carried the pain of a sacrifice that perhaps his son would never fully understand. Roberto wrote letters, lots of letters. For Lucas, always the same message: live your life, don't look back, do everything different from me. And to his wife, he asked her to take care of their son, not to let the boy get lost in the weight of guilt. Even though Lucas himself had never responded to a single letter, because the silence outside was as cruel as the cold inside. Roberto knew that absence hurts, but he also knew that his presence in freedom could have destroyed the boy even more. There, in that cold cell, between dirty walls and worn bars, he repeated to himself every night the phrase that supported his sacrifice: I did what any father would do. Even without knowing if one day on the outside, Lucas would understand the size of this love. Now answer me honestly, how far would you be able to go to protect someone you love? What would be your limit? Write the word here in the comments, sacrifice, if you believe that true love is capable of things the world would never understand. I'll be reading every comment, and I really want to know what you think about this story. Outside, far from the bars that kept his father imprisoned, Lucas walked in freedom, but it was a freedom that hurt more than any prison, because his prison was invisible. It was inside the mind, inside the chest, where silence turned into a scream, where guilt turned into punishment. Little by little, he disappeared from the world. Friends, they disappeared. School, abandoned. Smiles, they no longer existed. Lucas began to live hidden inside his own room, staring at the ceiling for hours, trying to understand how everything had gotten there. Deep down, he knew that his father had sacrificed himself for love, but that only made the weight even more cruel. In every childhood photo, in every corner of the house, there was a memory of who Roberto was, a present, hard-working, loving father, a man who worked hard to give the best to his son. And now, he was behind bars, growing old, suffering, carrying a crime that wasn't his. Lucas tried to follow. I tried to pretend normality, but his conscience was slowly killing him. At night, I barely slept. When he slept, he dreamed of the day of the crime. The scene returned like an infinite nightmare. The blood, the despair, the look in his father's eyes at the moment of confession. It tore him apart. He moved away from his mother. He stopped responding to messages. I had crying spells alone. He developed anxiety, depression, and a guilt that wouldn't let up. He could no longer bear to look in the mirror. The weight of the secret gnawed at his soul, because Lucas knew that, while he was walking free, the true hero of the story, the man who loved him more than life itself, was slowly dying inside a cell. And the question he feared most began to arise every day in his mind. How long will I be able to bear this silence? But a day came when neither silence, nor isolation, nor hidden pain were enough to silence what had been burning inside Lucas for almost a decade. He couldn't bear carrying that secret any longer. I no longer slept, I no longer lived, I just survived. The years had passed, but the weight inside him only grew. At 25 years old, with his eyes marked by sleepless nights, his face haggard and his voice trembling, Lucas sat in front of a simple cell phone. It was just him, the camera, and the weight of everything that needed to be said. It was the moment he feared most, but also the only possible way to, perhaps, forgive himself. The recording was not rehearsed. There was no script. There was no cut. It was pure, raw truth coming from the depths of a soul crushed by guilt. With ragged breaths and tears flowing uncontrollably, Lucas finally blurted out, my father didn't protect me from a crime. He protected me from myself. He put himself through hell to try to save me, but the culprit, the real culprit, was always me. I took that man's life, not because I wanted to, not because I planned it, but because I was afraid. I made a mistake. I panicked. I destroyed my life, and I destroyed his. The words which he had held back for years were now exploding for the entire world to hear. It was too late to go back in time, but it was too early to continue living in a lie. The video, initially posted on a small profile on social media, began to spread like wildfire. Shared, commented, debated. People who didn't know him were moved, revolted, shocked. Some judged him, others understood him. But no one could ignore the brutal courage of that moment. The video reached journalists, human rights defenders, and jurists. It even reached the news. And inevitably, it also reached the public ministry. The impact was so great that the courts had no choice but to reopen the case. Luke's confession was not just an emotional account. It was filled with details that had never been publicly disclosed. He described the exact position of the victim, the place where the murder weapon was discarded, the movements of the struggle, everything. Information that only the true perpetrator of the crime could know. With each sentence said in that video, the sand castle that supported Roberto's conviction began to crumble. It was the beginning of a new battle. But above all, it was the beginning of the truth, a truth that took too long to emerge, and that was too costly for everyone involved. And when the truth finally came out of the shadows, what was already heavy became even more devastating. Lucas's video wasn't just a confession, it was a suffocated cry from someone who carried the weight of guilt as far as their heart could bear it. The repercussion was so great that the authorities had no alternative but to reopen the case. But what they would find in the coming weeks went far beyond simple regret. The new investigation began discreetly, but soon gained gigantic proportions. Specialized forensic experts were appointed to analyze every detail of Lucas's testimony. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. He knew things that no one outside the crime scene could know. Lucas accurately described the moment of the fight, the position of the body, the man's reaction before falling, the exact place where the knife was thrown after despair took over. Details that had never been released to the public, details that not even Roberto, the father who took over everything, knew. The investigators returned to the abandoned land, looked for old records, and compared them with the data from the statement, and everything clicked. Every word, every gesture described by Lucas was the painful confirmation that he was, in fact, the perpetrator of the crime. But it was also confirmation of the biggest error of that conviction. The system, once again, preferred to believe a confession rather than investigate the truth in depth. The press was all over the case. The headlines changed tone. The man who was previously treated as a cruel murderer was now seen as the father who sacrificed his own freedom to protect his son. Roberto was not guilty. He was a victim of love, victim of despair, victim of a system that didn't want to look beyond the surface. The new legal team filed an official request for criminal review, documents, updated expertise, Lucas's video, testimonies, Everything was attached to the process. The prosecution, which had previously seemed so convinced, was now barely able to sustain the charge. The truth was too strong, too clear, too painful to ignore. There was no way out of the court. After 9 years, 9 long years living behind bars, isolated, forgotten, convicted of a crime he didn't commit, Roberto was about to have his sentence overturned. Justice, even if too late, began to recognize that it had made one of the biggest mistakes in its history. But what no one could imagine is that although freedom was close, the price this family paid would be eternal. Because there are marks that neither time nor the law nor the truth can erase. And now I need to know from you who have been watching me this far, honestly, do you think there is any limit to a father's love? Do you think that in Roberto's place, someone would have the courage to do the same? Right here in the comments. Love that marks forever. I want to see how many people here still believe that true love is capable of facing even freedom itself. After 9 long years in prison for a crime he never committed, Roberto finally saw the prison gates open. There was no press, there was no crowd, there was not even a formal apology. Only the cold wind of that morning cut through the heavy silence that surrounded his departure. His steps were slow, tired, as if the weight of everything he had experienced was still attached to his shoulders. His hair was now white, his face marked by deep wrinkles, not from age, but from suffering. The look was no longer the same man who had once dreamed of protecting his family. And there, standing on the sidewalk, with tears in his eyes and his face filled with guilt, was Lucas, the same son for whom he sacrificed his own freedom, but who now carried the weight of having destroyed the life of the man who loved him most. They looked at each other. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. At that moment, the silence between the two was more painful than any words. A silence full of everything that was trapped in the past. Lost time, forgotten birthdays, hugs denied by the cold bars of the system. They hugged, but it wasn't a hug of victory. It was a hug of survival. Because sometimes freedom comes, but the price it takes, no one ever returned. Lucas faced justice, but in a way that no court would be able to erase the true punishment, the guilt he himself carried in his heart. The process went quickly, much faster than his father's trial years before. After all, he had already publicly confessed. The video was circulated throughout the country, and the details he revealed could only be known by those who were actually at that crime scene. But time, that cruel ally of the system, had already passed too much. The court recognized the crime, yes, but he also recognized that he no longer posed a danger, that his late confession, although true, did not change the years that had already passed. Lucas was convicted, but received probation, with monitoring, without a closed prison. Free, but never truly free. Roberto, on the other hand, left the newspaper pages as a bitter symbol, a man who became an icon of an era born of love, a father who sacrificed everything so his son could have a chance. But what chance? The relationship between them was never the same again. The weight of the looks, the pain of the silences, the abyss created by the secret that lasted almost a decade. All of this separated more than it brought closer. The family. All that was left was what was left. Shards, fragments of a story that time has failed to repair. Roberto's wife, who spent years between hope and grief, tried to move on. Lucas, trapped in his own mind, fought the ghosts of the past. And Roberto walked the streets like a scarred survivor, not for a crime, but for a love that the system was never able to understand. What began as a father's purest gesture of love for his son ended as one of the greatest silent tragedies the system has ever witnessed. Roberto confessed out of love, a love so great, so instinctive, that it made him believe that carrying the weight of a crime he never committed on his shoulders was better than seeing his own son destroyed behind bars. For him, Being arrested was an acceptable sacrifice. But what he didn't imagine was that, on the other side, Lucas's silence wouldn't protect him. It would destroy him. Lucas remained silent out of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of shame, fear of disappointing the one who loved him most. But silence did not erase the guilt. On the contrary, he made her grow, feeding on every sleepless night, every look from her mother, every birthday her father spent behind bars. What seemed, at that moment, a solution, slowly became torture for both of them. And the system? The system, once again, did not investigate. He didn't want to know the details. He didn't look for the complete truth. He accepted an isolated confession as a final sentence, without seeking evidence, without cross-checking data, without questioning the gaps. The rush to close the case was greater than the commitment to justice. What seemed like protection turned into tragedy. What seemed like heroism turned into a mistake. What seemed like love cost everything. It cost Roberto the best years of his life. It cost Lucas his youth. It cost peace, family, dreams. And when the truth finally came out, raw, painful, unquestionable, it was too late. Because the time that is lost, no one gives it back. And if this story touched you, if at any point you felt this father's pain or the weight of this son's guilt, then this is the time to do something simple but powerful. Leave your like now and subscribe to the channel. Here, each story told is more than a video. It's a cry for justice. It's a voice for those who have been silenced. And get ready, because the next video brings an even more shocking story, where what seemed like protection became the perfect trap. You won't believe what happened.